Okay. Good morning, folks. Welcome to the Train the Trainer Part 1 um, on developing feedback to impact our programs, our FCS programs, elevating FCS programs by assessing satisfaction of people engaged in services. I am Amy Banco. I am a faculty member at Rutgers University in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions. And I'm very excited to be here with you amazing folks over at Washington State FCS programs. A gentle reminder that today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. We have Darren with us today, who is from HCA. And without the um, support of DBHR and HCA, we wouldn't have this fabulous series. So thank you to our funders. Just a reminder that this is an interactive training that we encourage folks as you're sitting throughout today's session to ask questions, to participate using the chat throughout the session. We want to make sure that today's session is really tailored towards you and your needs in your supported employment and supported housing programs. At the end of the session, the recording will be provided to HCA representatives, and that material will be sent out by email. You'll get the recording, as well as all of the materials that we'll be reviewing today. Also, a gentle note about artificial intelligence. I know some folks have been coming into some sessions using some of the AI automated note-taking bots, similar tools, and we just want to be mindful that those pieces of technology need prior approval. If we do see any unauthorized use of tools in our session, in the chat, it's at our discretion to remove it if it hasn't been pre-approved. If you do need access to pieces of technology like that for accommodation purposes, please don't hesitate to reach out prior to the session to get that pre-approval, so we know, right, that you are okay to use that in our session. If you know me and my approach to providing trainings, technical assistance, teaching, research, clinical services, my guidelines are always as such, that I ask that our space, our virtual space today, is guided by the premise that this is a knowledge share and safe space, that we actively engage in code learning or bi-directional learning, where we're all learning from one another, that we are maintaining respect for each other during the presentation, and just really acknowledging that everyone in this virtual space brings complex, beautiful identities. And again, just experience and knowledge and expertise that we can all share and learn from. So this is part 1 of our series on developing satisfaction surveys. The objectives for today reflect the objectives for our 2-part series in total. And so when we're thinking about part 1 and part 2 of our series, we are hoping that by the end of these two 1-hour sessions, you'll be able to use the Train the Trainer workbook developed by Rutgers University, specifically for the FCS programs in Washington State, to support the development of satisfaction surveys, to engage service participants in providing their feedback. So we're looking at having you use the workbook and in conjunction with the 2 PowerPoint slides to be able to design survey questions that are clear, concise, culturally sensitive, right? No more confusing surveys or surveys that could potentially be biased. We're also going to be looking at Proctor's implementation science outcome. Hopefully, when you leave from these 2 sessions, you'll know a little bit about implementation science and Proctor's model, looking at implementation science factors like feasibility, acceptability, appropriateness, and show how these concepts can guide you in how to tailor your satisfaction surveys to learn more about people's perception of your FCS programs. And you'll be able to train to your supervisors, staff, your QI programs, right? How to develop surveys that infuse implementation science into that survey. We're also going to look at the pieces of administrating surveys ethically, how to train to and speak to ethical administration. I'm looking at things like, consent, orientation of participants, helping to train your supervisors, your QI, to develop a good orientation for participants to the survey. And then we'll talk a bit about data collection, right? And train to how could you collect data and create that feedback loop so that survey results lead to end results that you're anticipating, right? Whether it's program improvements, modifications, adjustments of policies or procedures, etc. So we have a lofty agenda for these two sessions. And you'll be using the Train the Trainer workbook for these two sessions in conjunction with the PowerPoints to achieve some of these goals and to train on these goals. So I am putting into the chat again, for those of you who just joined, it is a Word document of the Train the Trainer workbook. This document is still kind of being honed and refined based on your feedback, but it entails everything that we'll be learning today and content that we will be learning on Thursday. That is part 2, Thursday at, I believe it's 10 a.m. for you folks in Washington State, 10 a.m. on this Thursday, the 26th, we'll be going over part 2. So we'll be utilizing this Train the Trainer workbook throughout our sessions so that you're able to have a tool, a concrete tool, to speak to these areas when you are, again, having conversations, trainings with your staff, with your supervisors, QI directors, administration, etc. And so if you open that book, you'll see we start with just some of the basics. Tips for trainers in terms of content delivery, right? And so thinking about and conceptualizing how to prepare for your trainings on developing surveys for service participants. We can see that we want to engage early with our trainers, looking at icebreakers, polls, to immediately connect participants in real world roles and the content, to build relevance and, kind of activate that prior knowledge, right, for better engagement. And we'll do just that in a moment with one of our first polls. We are also going to look at encouraging reflection, prompting participants in your trainings to reflect on their current practices, making material personally meaningful, relevant, right? Digging into that deeper learning by linking new concepts with their past experiences. We also want to model clarity, right? Break down technical or abstract terms in our trainings and sessions on developing satisfaction surveys, ensuring that there is accessibility for all of learners, kind of reinforcing understanding of that survey related concepts, especially with the implementation science. That might be, folks' first exposure to some of that material. And so we want to be clear, concise, and succinct. We also want to look at, for our trainings, inclusive language. And that's going to be a theme throughout today, having the ability to demonstrate non-stigmatizing language, culturally attuned language in our conversations, in our trainings, as well as conversations surrounding survey development, and our conversations with persons served or participants in service. We also want to look at fostering trust in our training environments and in the conversations of developing surveys. We want, learners to feel safe, as well as the service participants when they're taking the surveys. So we want to look at, ways that we can foster trust, build that working alliance with our staff, QI administrators, and that therapeutic alliance with the individuals who are in service participants. And again, thinking about trainer tips, keep it interactive, We have today worksheets that we'll be using that you'll use in your trainings on this topic, or conversations that you have with supervisors, administrators, and QI to really build input, build collaboration and engagement for input. And hopefully these methods really can activate different learning styles and sustained attention, right? Sustained attention can be challenging when we are in this virtual space. And then plan for follow-up, right? Offering post-session resources to show the staff that you're training, QI directors, whomever is participating in this training initiative, right? That we are committed to ongoing support and that it's not a one-off, it's a process, right? Ensuring that we're engaging in that collaborative process. Optional enhancements for trainers that I like to bring to everyone's attention as you train on developing satisfaction surveys with staff. Be prepared to use scenario-based role plays. That is always a great way to engage people, to get to kind of that sustained attention, to engage in, different learning styles, but also to bring abstract to pragmatic, right? How is this applicable? Here are some scenarios that were pertinent to our organization. We also want to be mindful of having maybe some pre and post training assessments. When you leave today, you'll have an assessment on today's content. I encourage you to do the same for your trainings so you get a sense of how things are progressing for your staff as they're learning about survey development. And record participant questions and ideas for integration into agency and QI initiatives. This is really, I think, something that people find beneficial in terms of collating information. So today, the activities that we'll be doing are going to be in a Google Doc where all of the information, the responses are going to be collated and you can refer back to it, right? So we'll have different people answering from different agencies, the things and strategies they're doing, and you'll be able to take that collated information, bring it back to your agencies. I encourage you to do the same when you're doing your training, right? Thinking of ways to collect and disseminate participant responses, shared ideas, whatever way that you can kind of build community around your training. And with that said, giving you some of that basic train the trainer information, we're on our first activity. So put in the chat the program that you're currently working at, the agency that you currently are employed at. Are they collecting service participant satisfaction feedback? And you could put into the chat your response. You can see A, yes, routinely, B, yes, occasionally, C, not yet, or D, not sure, I'm new to this content, right? Before we jump into the content, we want to get a sense of where everyone's coming from. You can also put into the chat as you're responding. Oh, I see stuff coming in through the Q&A. Oh, we're seeing that the chat is disabled, question mark. I am so sorry. Let's see. Okay, let's see if we can get this enabled. Panelists can chat with everyone. Attendees can chat with everyone. Can you guys confirm that chat is now accessible? Thank you so much. Welcome, welcome. So as you see, answers coming in. I see some A's, a B, D, A, E. Occasionally. Occasionally. I am. Okay. So we have a wide variety of responses coming in. A mix, if you will. And so if you already have some experience with surveys and survey development, that's great. You can share your experiences and throughout today's session, and you may find some tools to refine them. And this is the kind of feedback that you would want to give your trainees, right? If folks are coming into your session and they have experience, amazing. You want to emphasize their knowledge, their competencies, and draw them into the conversation. As we see in the chat, other people may not have um, some of that experience. And we want to really emphasize in our trainings, right, that you're not alone, right? That's why we're here today, right? And that if you're not sure if you are engaging in the collection of data from participants, service participants, then hopefully by the end of this training, you'll have ideas to bring back to your agency to enhance some conversations. Um, and we'll just kind of be mindful as we go along throughout the training to think about how we can apply these tips, whether you're improving existing survey knowledge and development or building a process from scratch. Right. So as you see, I'm kind of like utilizing the reflective responding or summarization of ORs to kind of give a concise, succinct summary of participants. You're going to want to do that in your training, right? Letting people know that it's okay to be at whatever level and that the session you're providing is going to be beneficial for everyone. So as we move from getting an understanding of where people are at, now we want to engage our participants in getting the rationale, the why. And the why is really important. When we help our staff, QI directors, supervisors, to understand why we're doing something, hopefully, and as we elicit the why from them, like we're about to do, will build investment, will build motivation. People will have a better conceptualization of, right, I have 101 things that I'm doing throughout the day. Amy, why am I spending my time on this? And so this slide for your training purposes will be really important. So I'm going to throw the question back at you that you'll be asking your trainees. Why measure service participant satisfaction? You could put in the chat. Why measure service participant satisfaction? Why are we slowing down in terms of what we do um, to learn more about people's perceptions? Darren, are you able to see things coming into the chat? Because I do not.
I had some stuff comes in periodically. It doesn't seem to be consistent. It's a little.
Is it wonky? Because I all of a sudden I saw people's responses and then I saw things being removed.
I saw that too a little while ago. So wonky, yes.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on with Zoom today.
Some new stuff is coming in.
I do see some stuff coming in from Jessica to improve services. Yeah, we want to get a sense of where are the needs? How do we do what we do and do it better? Yes, Jessica. To learn what we're doing right, just as Jessica echoed, in terms of like finding out where that improvement needs to occur, right? Where is the growth area, as Gail's identifying? Feedback is a learning opportunity from Bree. Yeah, you can also learn from feedback and make changes. Yes, continuous quality improvement feedback loop. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, performance quality improvement. Amazing. So you guys are hitting the nail on the head. We want to invest in measuring person served satisfaction because we know that when we have that process in place, it's linked to better engagement and outcomes, right? Research shows that when participants are satisfied with services, they are more likely to stay involved and follow through with the services being offered, hopefully leading to better outcomes, results in their recovery. On the flip side, when we see that people are unhappy, right, they may drop out or disengage. People will vote with their engagement, right? Whether they like something or not. And if they're unhappy, more often than not, you're going to have no-shows, lost to contact, people who are just not following through, right? So satisfaction isn't just a nice extra, it can actually impact the effectiveness of our programs. Also, it's essential for person-centered services, right? Person-centered services which we really espouse in supported employment and supportive housing as being recovery oriented and centered around the individual, right? Individualized, tailored services, meaning we value the person's feedback. And what better way to honor that than systematically listening to their experience? We can ask individuals, job seekers, housing tenants, how do they feel about their services, to get their perception of what the experience is like for them, right? And then there's this accountability piece. When we think about our programs, funders and oversight agencies pay attention to satisfaction. In fact, SAMHSA explicitly recommends using satisfaction surveys as an indicator of program performance, right? They look at, for example, supportive housing, right? That resident satisfaction surveys are a valuable gauge for how a recovery housing program is doing. And as you mentioned, I think it was Gail and Bree, the way that the programs can improve, build that improvement process. And then surveys, as I just noted, help us to make changes, to identify areas of growth. Satisfaction surveys can act like mirrors, reflecting back the strengths and weaknesses of our services, excuse me. Maybe the feedback tells you that participants really enjoy working with certain staff and staff's dedication, but maybe they find the intake process as overwhelming or confusing, right? And maybe there's something that we can do to kind of fix that. Right? Looking at where are our strengths and where our areas of need lie. And so when we think about the rationale, right, it's helpful to then kind of bring it back down to the trainees and getting information from our trainees as to, if it's so important, right, how are we currently doing it, right? How does the agency or program, our supported housing program, the supported employment program, currently utilize satisfaction surveys? And so I'm going to put this Google Doc into the chat. And this is our first activity that you'll be using with your own trainees to get a baseline of how things are being done. I'm going to break everyone up into smaller groups. Actually, you know what? I don't think we have the breakout groups. That's okay. We do not need our breakout groups for this activity. What we do need is for everyone to click on that Google document. And it's going to open up a second window to this worksheet in our Train the Trainer workbook. And I would like for you to go through those questions for the next 5 minutes and answer to the best of your ability each question. In the Google Doc, it is not on one page. It spans 3. Each question has its own page. So take the next 5 to 7 minutes to go into that Google Doc and respond to each question. I'm going to shift my share from our PowerPoint to the Google Doc, and that way we can take a look as the information is being populated. When you do this activity in your trainings, you can do it individually, you could do it in breakout group rooms. If it's in person, you can have them discuss in small groups, because you want to get a sense of where different programs are at within your organization, or if you're training across agencies, what that looks like. Again, I'm stopping the share and I'm going to share that Google Doc. Hopefully you all are filling some of that material out as we are chitty-chatting. Amazing. I do see folks working in that document. Let's see if I can share screen. So our first question, what current tools or methods do you or your organization use to assess satisfaction? I love all of our anonymous alligator, anonymous blobfish. Google Docs is so cute like that. Um, we use paper and email surveys annually to all participants, guardians, case managers. Love that anonymous frog in terms of your diverse stakeholders that you're focusing on, different modalities of format that you're using, right? From paper to email, having different modes to complete that survey can be so important. And we'll get into that in another moment. Let's see. I see use a page that is offered annually to rate satisfaction, QI calls. Wonderful. So I can see that that person is getting some quantitative information with those satisfaction surveys, as well as qualitative information potentially with the QI calls. We're getting a mixture of feedback, some that we can look at in terms of frequency, prevalence, and then the QI calls get some deep, rich feedback that we can look for themes. I love that. Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, polls. Organizations will send telephone and paper-based surveys to individuals. Case notes, also sometimes Microsoft Forms, cold calls. Excellent. So a wide array of answers for question one. I'm really curious to see if people have any responses for question two, which is examples where participant feedback led to change. Examples where participant feedback led to change. I know a real world example for me. I was overseeing a supported education program, and we had this policy in place that if you were not meeting by a certain frequency, I think it was like once every 30 days, you might automatically be discharged from services. And if you know anything about supported education, you know that there are periods, peak service utilization periods, and periods of time where students may disengage. And that disengagement time frame was typically the summers, right? When they weren't in school. Most students were often not taking summer sessions, and when they were off from, May to the end of August, they did not want to meet frequently. And so one of the pieces of feedback was your policy on discharge, is something that is quite concerning. It doesn't meet my service needs. I titrate down during the summer, right? That person like disengages intentionally during the summer to rest, to restore, and prepare for their next semester. And so the policy was actually modified specifically for the program, right? That feedback led to this identification that the policy wasn't meeting the service participants' needs. It was actually a disadvantage. Amazing. So I see patient individual education programs based on feedback. Love that. So some psychoeducation was provided to help. Not sure. That's okay if you're not sure. And then how do you currently report back to individuals about feedback use? Not sure. That's okay too. Contract monitoring and to ensure we're meeting the needs of individuals we serve. Yeah, this might not be something that a lot of folks have access to, right? How is that information shared with participants? But it's okay to, again, not have all the answers, to be curious about what can be done, to start brainstorming as we go through the series, things that could be done to support that feedback use. And that's really important, right? Knowing that the feedback someone's spending time giving you, right, it leads to something um, in terms of change, right? Why am I taking this time as a service participant to complete this satisfaction survey if it's not going to be used in a meaningful, purposeful way? And so we as trainers for our agency want to train to that, right? In terms of letting folks know how information is being shared. You see some things coming in Q&A. Okay, that's just about the chat being disabled. All right, great. So Again, this is a nice exercise to get further information from your trainees about how things are being utilized, what it looks like, right? What does it currently look like in the landscape of your program, your organization, what's being done, and how things could be improved upon. I am just going to go back to sharing screen. And again, my recommendation is that as you're training to this, you're going to want to share the comments, the processes, the ways that individuals are engaging with folks at the end of the session, right? So that they have that collated information. So as you're continuing your training for, again, supervisors, QI directors, we want to then identify satisfaction survey design, right? When you're conducting your training, you want to make the point that satisfaction surveys, right, are most useful when questions are clear and relevant, when participants feel respected and safe, when data is leading to meaningful program change, and that poor design leads to that incomplete, invalid, or unusable data, right? Poor survey design. So thinking about that, can you recall a time when you answered a survey that felt confusing or frustrating? Right? Have you ever attempted to complete a survey that felt confusing or frustrating? What contributed to that issue? And again, these questions that I'm asking are for deeper discussion on this topic, looking at when surveys are most useful or when they are challenging. And that's listed in your workbook, the Train the Trainer workbook, questions for deeper discussion on the basics of satisfaction design. You can put in the chat if you recall a time that you answered a survey that felt confusing or frustrating and what contributed to that issue. As you look at the workbook, you'll see we're going to dive into a checklist that helps us to design satisfaction survey questions that can reduce issues, right? Reduce issues that contribute to people feeling confused or frustrated or uncertain, right? That might be surveys are confusing when they're too long, when they're asking multiple questions in one, right? That's why we follow a more structured process to help us get an effective data collection process. When we think about best practices for designing surveys for service participants, we can think about utilizing questions like Likert scales. A Likert scale survey question, as you can see in the workbook, as you're going to train to this, presents a statement and asks respondents to rate their level of agreement or their experience on a fixed scale, typically a 5-point range. And it's commonly used to measure attitudes, perceptions, or satisfactions in a structured and quantifiable way. Likert scales are really allowing service participants to express varying levels of agreement, frequency, or satisfaction. An example might be a scale of strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly disagree. And creating questions like this really helps us to gauge how like to what degree or frequency or strongly does someone feel about the statement rather than the binary yes or no if they agree or not. And so we think about crafting Likert scale questions. We want to avoid yes or no questions or double barrel questions. Yes or no limits the range of responses and really doesn't capture the level of degree or specificity, which gives us incomplete information. And double barreled questions combine two ideas into one item. We want to phrase statements neutrally to prevent, leading responses, and use simple, direct language in our Likert scale. And we want to couple that Likert scale design with some additional best practices. And those start with one, as we're training to develop surveys for participants, we want to define clear objectives, clarify the purpose of the survey, identify specific information you want to gather. Think about a time where you were a part of developing a survey, right? What were some specific purposes? You could put in the chat. What were some specific purposes for developing satisfaction surveys? Was it to assess satisfaction? Was it to assess areas of growth, need, barriers to service, service utilization? Was it to meet funding requirements? Your purpose guides your questions, and your purpose will inform your plan for data usage, right? How you're going to analyze and use it. So we want to be crystal clear as we start with a group. Why are we developing the survey? What is the purpose? Darren, are you able to see things coming into the chat? I see them coming in and then disappearing.
I saw a couple things come in from Bree and Lenny.
Okay, I don't see those.
Yeah, Lenny asked when none of the answers matched my experience, but other was not an option. And Bree just put in as a teacher writing quizzes to see if students did the reading.
Yes.
This
So
is
checking for understanding, absolutely. Lenny, I'm assuming you're kind of the question that you're answering is what was confusing? A time that you experienced something that was confusing on a survey. And so when none of the answers matched the experience. Yeah. So defining that purpose, Darren, I don't think my chat is working. So if you could just keep an eye on it, because I'm not seeing things come in and sometimes they're even disappearing.
I've
I'm
seen
not sure what's happening.
pop in up above as well, so there's something kind of weird going on, but I'll do my best. Do you want me just
Yeah, thank you, Darren. I
right
appreciate
in?
you so much.
Okay.
So thinking about purpose, that's our first best practice. Know your purpose, define it, and that will drive everything. Next, we want to know the audience. Knowing your audience is especially critical in supported employment and supported housing programs. We want to consider, participants' cultural identity, right? The preferred languages for individuals, literacy level. We want to be mindful, even things like trauma-informed survey development. Um, and we know that inclusive survey design increases both response rates and the quality of data that we're collecting. So get a good understanding of your purpose. Why are we doing this? What is the goal, the aim, the objective in completion of the survey? And who are we giving this survey to? Who's taking it? What does that population look like? And how do we design the survey to that population, right? These are key features that you want to train your staff, QI, and administrators on. Then we want to look at crafting clear and concise questions. Simple, jargon-free language that avoids double-barreled questions. Double-barreled questions, an example might be, how satisfied are you with your housing case manager and your supported employment case manager? There are two questions there. So we want to be very mindful as we're training staff and QI, right? We just want one singular question per item, right? Sticking to one concept per question for that clarity. We also want to use, again, be mindful of choosing appropriate question types. Someone mentioned in our Word doc, one of the anonymous animals, that their program's process was to elicit surveys and some phone calls, right? So we could imagine that those surveys might have some closed-ended questions, for quick data on the survey, right, are Likert scales, some multiple choice options, and our open-ended questions might be questions that we ask on that phone interview where it's more open-ended and we're getting rich, deep feedback. So make sure that you're tailoring your questions based on the type of um, tool or method you're using for data collection, right? If we're doing a survey, we want to limit those open-ended questions because we know people are not going to complete a ton of lengthy open-ended questions. We want those surveys to be approximately like 5 max, right, 8 minutes in length. We also want to look at the design logic and flow of the survey. A well-structured survey is going to read like a conversation. We're going to start with general questions, and then move into specific topics, grouping them by themes to help respondents stay oriented. We don't want to kind of be all over the place. We also, thinking about best practice, want to pilot, um, right? Pilot test that survey. That helps us to catch confusing questions, technical issues before wide distribution of that survey. So test with people who reflect that target group. Even if you have 5 pilot testers, that can give you valuable insight. Just a little bit of data can go a long way in terms of that pilot test.
Hey, Amy,
And yes.
I just had a question on the previous slide about those testers. Are there some recommendations in terms of getting a diverse group together?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great question, Darren. You want your pilot test group to reflect your target group. And so if you know your target group um, is predominantly, people of color, you would want your pilot group to reflect, right, the cultural identity of your targeted population that you are going to administer the survey to, right? We want to kind of mirror the representation. Great question.
In coordination with that, would you need like a special release if I was looking for doing employment and I wanted some of the folks that I'm working with lived experience? Is there like a separate release of information that I should be aware of in terms of working with that test group?
It, every organization has a different process and protocol for internal research as well as external research. Research just being, exploring um, the experience, right, of the participant in services. And so I would first and foremost recommend that each program refer back to your internal process of conducting surveys and research with participants served or service participants. But typically there is a consent form in terms of, you know, uh, uh, um, participating in that pilot process or participating in a survey altogether where someone is agreeing, right, with information from that orientation of the survey, right, that informed consent of participating in the survey altogether, right? Consent is very critical, I think, in both process.
Thanks for the overview.
Yeah, of course. Thinking about the additional best practices, and we mentioned this already, we want to optimize survey length. Longer surveys are rarely completed in full. Think back to surveys that you have completed, right? If they're longer in length, um, people might drop out, right? They might stop their participation and just discontinue. So we want to aim for brevity, ideally no more than 10 minutes max. 10 minutes might even be pushing it. Sweet spot might be 5 to 7, 8, right? And focus on questions that connect directly to the objectives. If you find that your survey takes, a duration of time over this, call the questions, cut the questions that don't directly connect to your objective. And then to Darren's comment earlier, right? We want people in all parts of this process to be fully informed of what this is that we're doing, right? And to consent to consent with that background, that orientation, that information and knowledge of what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it's going to be utilized, leveraged in the organization, whether that's the pilot study, a test pilot for the survey, or if it's the facilitation administration of the larger program or organizational survey. We always want to obtain that informed consent, and it has to be in an accessible language and clearly explain how privacy is protected. And what about this piece of confidentiality, right? That confidentiality is critical and can build trust and encourage honesty. If someone thinks, oh, I'm, speaking to my dissatisfaction in some ways about my employment provider, and I don't feel that there is anonymity or confidentiality, I won't be honest and forthcoming. So we want to be mindful of that process and give it its attention, right? We also want to make sure, to Darren's point, that the survey is culturally attuned. So thinking about survey development, you want to train to having a diverse stakeholder group, co-creation of that survey with people from varied racial identities, ethnic identities, gender identities, disability backgrounds, right? Any cultural identity of relevance to our targeted survey group, right? And we can do that by having an advisory group, bringing in diverse staff, bringing in service participants into the process of survey development, not just piloting, but also that survey development. We also want to use inclusive demographic categories, person first language, and identity affirming language, right? Allow multiple selections and open fields for things like racial identity, ethnicity, gender identity, affectional identity. We want to phrase questions with language that is culturally sensitive, avoid assumptions about shared norms, family structures, values. We want to use plain language free of jargon or idioms that do not translate to other cultures. We can also look at this piece about addressing power and safety. So how will data be used to build trust? Going back to that ethics of informed consent, confidentiality, anonymity, can also be integrated into being culturally attuned to address power and safety. We want to include questions about equity or inclusion, right? Things like, I feel respected by my supported employment specialist, and then that Likert scale. That all can assist with building culturally attuned surveys. Someone mentioned earlier providing the survey electronically, via email, in paper format. And that is also being culturally attuned, right? Providing multiple ways to participate, offering multiple formats, paper, digital, even oral, right? Being mindful of technology access, literacy, disability needs. Just having those multiple ways to participate can be culturally attuned in several regards. We also want to conceptualize being culturally attuned, not just in survey development, but also in analysis. So thinking about, and this is getting ahead of ourselves for a second, we want to break down the results potentially as we analyze by disaggregating data, right? Breaking down results by racial identity, ethnicity, gender identity, to identify, right, any findings, especially disparities amongst these cultural identities, right? And we want to really be mindful of reporting findings transparently and use that to inform equity-driven changes within our programs. And then being culturally attuned is also being trauma-informed. So we want our survey to have elements of trauma-informed practices. Trauma and core principles of trauma-informed survey practices kind of mirror trauma-informed care. So, first concept is safety. Ensure that the survey environment, that when it's being administered, right, that it's, in person or online, feel private, low pressure, provide clear information about why the survey is being used, how data will be protected, which goes into that trustworthiness and transparency, letting a person know how responses will be used, who's going to see them, right? Avoid any hidden agendas, be upfront that feedback may lead to program improvement if that's the aim or objective of the survey. As you're training to this, you want to look at choice and control as being a part of trauma-informed survey practices. That participation should be optional for service participants, and that individuals should be able to skip questions and still be able to take that survey, right? Again, offering multiple ways to complete it is also trauma-informed to honor different levels of comfort. And then this piece about collaboration, co-design surveys with individuals who have that lived experience with our service participants whenever possible, validate the input that they're sharing, um, let them know how that feedback will be used in that survey development. We also want to include positively framed items asking about, strengths, voice, progress. And that goes to that empowerment and strengths-based approach. And then the principles of trauma-informed survey practices also refer back to being culturally attuned, right? When we are trauma-informed, we are culturally attuned, practicing that cultural humility, avoiding assumptions, ensuring questions are inclusive and respectful of cultural values and identities. And so as you then move to your training, you're going to do your last exercise for session 1. This can be in a breakout group room where you would support participants, your training participants, staff, QI, administrators, in looking at the worksheet that explores developing survey questions in alignment, in agreement with the best practices that we just reviewed. So this worksheet, you'll see 10 sample survey questions. And for each question, you're going to assist your training participants, again, your QI directors, staff, supervisors, administrators, in learning through this worksheet whether or not the sample question is in alignment with best practices, why or why not. And this activity should take probably about 10 minutes in your training. You'll give your breakout group rooms or your groups in person approximately 5 to 7 minutes to review. And then you're going to come back and kind of in the larger group debrief what were the group's findings. We are about 5 minutes out from the end of our session today. So the next 2 to 3 minutes, take a look at that survey worksheet that is on page 4 of the Google Doc that I put in the chat.
I apologize, but I don't have access to external files.
I'm sorry, my Google, my my home thing is talking as I'm saying the word Google. My apologies. So I'm going to put that document in the chat again. I believe it's on page 4, going to page 5. Take a look at those questions. In the workbook, you'll see that document in the appendix, and it has an answer sheet. That answer sheet will allow you, the trainer, to walk through this exercise with reference for each question as to whether it adheres or doesn't adhere and why to the best practice slides and checklist in the workbook that we just reviewed. And I'm going to pull that up. Let's see. Oh, I do not have a document coming up in my share screen. So I'm pulling up the Train the Trainer workbook so that you guys can take a quick review. Again, this document is in the chat. Today we have reviewed from the table of contents the introduction, trainer preparation guide, program evaluation session 1, up to page 10. Our next session, we're going to continue with activity 3, and then we'll move to the implementation science component, and then get into administering and analyzing the survey. So the last worksheet that we had referenced, we went over the principles of trauma-informed survey development, and then activity 3. And as you can see, this is in our appendix. So I'm going down to our appendix to pull that document up. This is the PowerPoint slides that I went over for best practices is listed here in the checklist. So literally, this is a sheet that you can give your staff, your administrators, your QI that you'll be training to keep beside them as they're developing surveys to ensure that it aligns, their survey development process aligns with best practices. And then here is the exercise that you'll pull during your training to help your trainee participants get a better understanding of, do these sample questions align with the best practices listed in the checklist and on the PowerPoint slides that we reviewed. You'll see different examples here that, for example, are you happy with everything, right? We know that that does not adhere. And it doesn't adhere because it's too vague. It's a yes or no question. It doesn't give us any information, concrete information, to analyze. And again, you'll see here is the answer sheet for you to review as you are facilitating your training. And this practice guide will help you then to have the participants rewrite questions. So next time we meet, we'll start with this activity. We'll go through maybe some of these questions and rewrite some of these questions, so you can get a feel for that process and then can train to it in your training sessions. Any questions from today? I know I threw a lot at you in our 60 minutes together. Just as a gentle reminder, we are going to reconvene this Thursday, the 26th, 10 a.m. Washington time, to review our next objectives of going over the implementation science, and then data collection, orientation, ethical orientation, and data collection and analysis. Any questions? It was great seeing you guys today. I'm going to put a survey into the chat. Ooh, this survey will allow you to give feedback on today's session. I greatly appreciate it if you could fill that out, and that will help us inform anything for session 2 on Thursday. Thanks, folks. I look forward to seeing you this Thursday.
Thanks for a great training, Amy. Thanks everyone for hanging in there today, going through all this information. We'll see you all Thursday.